Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Utah League of Cities and Towns annual conference and this workshop, Reimagining Building Community Trust in Our Police Departments. My name is John Park with the League. Our sponsor for this session, as you can see on the slides, is IRMA, Utah Risk Management Agency. I'd like to thank them for their sponsorship. Before I introduce our instructors today, I would like to just point out a couple of housekeeping issues. First of all, as you start going today, you'll have there'll be a poll that you can fill out, just to help us identify who's listening. And also I want to remind you that if you have a question, you can certainly just click on the chat feature and ask it, and we'll do our best to pick it up. Both of our presenters today is with the Arbinger Group. First of all, Jack Caldwell is the director of Arbinger's public safety practice. Jack oversees Arbinger's work with police and public safety agencies across America and the world. Jack retired after nearly 29 years with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. His duties included patrol, SWAT, investigations, professional training, leadership and organizational development. He served at the end of his career as the co-founder of the Regional Police Academy's Leadership Academy. He's also the co-author of a book, Unleashing the Power of Unconditional Respect, Transforming Law Enforcement and Police Training. Jack is a graduate of the U.S. Army's University of Foreign Military and Cultural Studies Red Team course and holds a Bachelor's of Science degree. He has advised and consulted in writing curriculum for various agencies and enjoys speaking and training frequently with numerous public safety organizations around the world, around the country and around the world for that matter. Also with us is Chief Greg Dagnan. He's police chief of the city of Carthage, Missouri. Greg has been in law enforcement since 1990. Besides chief, Greg has been a patrol officer, a traffic officer, a DARE officer, SRO or student resource officer, and a criminal investigator. He has been the executive director of a nonprofit agency with the responsibility for investigating child abuse and a university professor at Missouri Southern State University. He's been the chief of Carthage since 2008, and he continues to teach many training seminars and is an Arbinger Outward Mindset Training facilitator. So gentlemen, if you could just take it away.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully we'll get going on this.
You getting it shared there?
Yeah, I have to find it correctly because it's well, the right one's not showing up for me now.
Chief Dagnan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your city as we start going here?
Sure, yeah. Hey, thanks for having us here. And I'm actually I know Jack and I are both very excited about being here and talk to you about this because, you know, as we've progressed through the stuff that Jack's going to talk about, the Arbinger Outward Mindset and the SAM model, you know, one of the things that's a little bit difficult is you tell your folks, you know, you teach them, train them how to be outward toward people, and you know, kind of try to instill that in them, but it's kind of hard to know if they really are doing it or not. And so with the survey that we're going to talk about today, I think we were able to kind of establish that we did that. And as you pointed out, I've been chief here since 2008, but really the stuff that we're going to talk about today changed our department drastically, changed my leadership style, and it's been a very positive thing for us. So of course, if we can get a chance to talk about it, we're always excited to do that.
All right, Jack, we see your screen. Go ahead.
Finally, sorry about that. So I'm going to launch right into it. Thanks, Greg, for kind of doing a little song and dance to help us through that. I want to explain one basic Arbinger framework Normally you would, participants would get this midway through the workshop. So but it's a pretty simple concept, and I'm just going to explain one and use it to set up what Greg's going to talk about where we actually implemented this major impact thing. So this basic Arbinger framework, the thing about Arbinger frameworks is that they're always incredibly simple, but they at the same time have a very complex operating system running underneath them. Just like theoretically hitting the screen share button on a 3-screen computer is simple, but there's a lot of complexity underneath it and it can go wrong. So simple framework, but a lot of complexity at work underneath it. So the simple framework is called, we call it SAM, the outward mindset pattern. And real quickly, it's C, people, S, A, adjust efforts, and then M, SAM, measure impact. Now, you see on, I'm assuming it's your right side, but it has that little diagram, and it shows, you know, like the idea is that you're in the middle of this diagram, and to balance this out, the outside triangle, like say above your supervisors, I want to see the person I'm responding to and be aware of their needs, objectives, challenges, the things they're trying to accomplish, and those type things. So that's the 1. And then the 2 is adjust efforts. That means that I work in a way that's actually responsive to what I've learned about what the other person needs and what they're trying to accomplish. And then 3, where Greg Dagnan comes in and the Carthage experience is measure the impact, like hold myself or ourselves accountable for the impact of our work on others. So in a real simple sense, that's the diagram, or that's the model. Now, you're going to, at the end of this, you're going to be invited to a summit that Arbinger is hosting at the end of this month. But I just want to mention that this SAM model, you're going to see at the summit, you're going to see recognized experts in officer safety, situational awareness, and decision-making speak to the idea that officer safety and situational awareness is actually enhanced by seeing people as people, because as it turns out, that's how people really are. People are people. And so situational awareness and officer safety decision-making is enhanced with the SAM model. We're also going to have a panel of experts who are going to talk about officer wellness, resiliency, and suicide prevention. Well, as it turns out, when we work in a culture where we see one another as people and we're alive to the burdens and the concerns and objectives of each other, and we work and we adapt our work in a way to be more helpful, it turns out that that is a more healthy, resilient culture within an organization. Now, what we're going to talk about more specific here is the SAM model application to, as it relates to building public trust. And that's where Chief Dagnan is going to come in. So let me just drill down a little bit on the SAM model. So real quick, at the big picture situational awareness model, we refer people, like we're looking at the big picture, like seeing people in this, say, operating environment. A good model for that, for thinking about what that might look like, is captured in a book about the Marine Combat Hunter course called Left of Bang. Bang being a bad event. Everything left of that, my left, is what happens before that. Everything right of that is what you do in response to the bad event. So left of bang would be operating before bang, okay? And so what they're saying is what they learned with the Marines experience in the early days of Afghanistan was that if they can attune to people in the environment in a certain way, they can greatly enhance their situational awareness on a big picture level, operate more safely in this dangerous asymmetrical warfare environment, and have a better decision-making grid. So they talk about things like you're looking at the environment issues such as kinesics, the kinds of mannerisms that people are doing in the environment, biometrics, just the kind of autonomic things that people are doing that you're picking up on, proxemics, you know, interpersonal spatial distances between people. So they have these 6 domains that if you're looking at the big picture, the people in there, you're looking for in any particular environment, what would be a baseline of normalcy. So you think of, like, you drive by a school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and it's letting out, and you're used to seeing the people coming out of the school. They're behaving a certain way, they're moving with a certain speed, they're grouped up in certain clusters, they distribute in certain ways, they're dressed a certain way. And then all of a sudden one day you drive by and you see something that's anomalous, like the people are grouping up real tightly towards an area, or people are scattering away from an area, or you see people in the group that are dressed differently, or you see people in the group that don't belong because they're behaving in a way that's contrary to how everyone else is behaving. This would be an anomaly. And so the model would be baseline, whatever is normal for this area at this time, plus anomaly equals decision, a decision structure based on what you've observed. So that would be the see people, adjust efforts, and then of course measure impact. So situational awareness is greatly enhanced by how we see people in an environment and kind of develop an intuitive sense about what would be normal and how then I can adjust. I can see anomalies quickly. Now, there's another way of when you get a little more down into the weeds about this, and if we want to see people in like if we're concerned about the wellness of people or de-escalation, I may be looking at things more like, does this person feel comfortable and like recognized in what this is going on, or do they feel like real agitated around that? Do they feel like they have a sense of how things are going to turn out, or do they need reassurance around that? Does this person seem to have a sense of autonomy, or do they feel like everyone's, people are trying to control them? Does this person feel related in a connected way to the people around them, or do they feel isolated? And is this person perceiving what's going on as being fair to them? So that would be a more drill down of seeing people and being a way of understanding their needs and objectives and challenges in a more like individual comprehensive way. And then of course, there's adjust effort. So given what I've learned about people in this environment or this individual, how can I adjust to be more helpful and productive with them while we're mutually trying to accomplish our goals? So in a real sense, that's kind of the model. Now, obviously Arbinger does a lot more with the see people because there's some nuanced understandings about that, but we're not going to take the time to get into that. Just mean like, I'm not seeing you as an obstacle that's in my way because I'm trying to get something accomplished and you're just not cooperating. I'm not seeing you as a vehicle to get my things done. And I'm not seeing you as irrelevant. I'm actually seeing you as a person, and I'm alive to you as a person. That's essentially it. Adjust efforts around that. Now here's where the real critical aspect comes in, is measure impact. The only way I really know that I'm actually accomplishing this and not deceiving myself into thinking I'm accomplishing it is to measure the impact I'm having on people. As an individual level, there's any number of ways I can do that. But at an organizational level, it becomes a little more complex. And in today's world, we're actually arguing that if we measure impact, we can actually guarantee and prove and demonstrate that we are actually responding to people in a way that's helpful and endearing public trust and cooperation, and the things we're doing in areas where we're not accomplishing that. So the measure impact is really the thing that we want to drill down on. And I'm going to turn it over to Chief Dagnan to talk about the experiment we ran with his police agency. And there's another little, kind of like what you might think of as a scoreboard. We didn't, like this could theoretically be used, like published on the World Wide Web. Chief Dagnan, we didn't do this at the time, but this would be a model that we've thought about since then about how this could be transparently open before people. And hopefully I can advance the slide and you can see that, and then Chief Dagnan can take over from here.
I got it. Thank you, Jack. So again, I know we have a very short time together and I want to make sure and get to the heart of the matter. But just to give you guys a little bit of background, is I took over this department in 2008. I'd been in leadership roles before, but I'd never been a police chief before. And I was told I was taking over a very fine, well-run, fine department, stable department, and that seemed to be the case. And then in 2008, just literally months after I took over, we had one of our officers commit suicide, and it really became, I mean, you know how when you're in crisis, your faults really seem to, the things you're doing right seem to show up, and your faults really seem to be more glaring. And so, we realized at that time that there were some things we were not doing right. We we were saying we were taking care of each other, but we really weren't. We were saying that we were taking care of our community, which in some ways we were, in some ways we weren't. And so I really kind of wanted to change the culture of this department. And Jack and Arbinger helped with that a lot. I ended up reading the book Leadership and Self-Deception, which if you haven't read that book, you got to read that book. It's a great leadership book. Ended up contacting Jack, and we ended up doing the outward mindset classes down here. So now the outward mindset classes are required of everybody in my department within the first year that they're here. And of course, one of the things that comes out of the outward mindset classes is the SAM model that Jack just went through. And so I was watching our department culturally change, I thought, for the better. I was watching our community maybe get cared for a little bit better. And Jack and I would continue to have, lengthy conversations, actually, like we did today. Jack and I, if we get on the phone together, it seems like you can't get us off the phone, but we were having these kind of lengthy conversations about, but how do we know, right? How does the guy that works at the turkey plant here in Carthage, how does he feel about the PD? And how do we know? The old lady that lives on Main Street, how do we know how she feels? She has very little contact with the PD. And so how does she really feel about the PD? And, our people that we deal with daily, how do they feel? And so we just kept having this, we just kept kind of sharpening each other's ideas and going back and forth on this. And this actual crazy idea came up that we're going to do a 1-question survey. And that is exactly what we did. We did a 1-question survey, which I have to set this up a little bit. We definitely did not, first of all, I didn't want to do the, hey, let's go online and have everybody take the survey, because, I think our stakeholders in the community that do appreciate us, they would take the survey and we'd get feedback, and it would not be complete feedback. And so I didn't really want to do that. There are other survey methods. What we were doing at the time is a supervisor would pick 3 reports out and would call those 3 victims and say, hey, how are you treated, whatever. And again, that was fine, but it was incomplete information. So we thought, hey, what if we had this 1-question survey and everybody got it? If you had contact with the Carthage Police Department, you're going to get it, but it's got to be easy to fill out. It's got to be something that everybody would take 5 seconds and fill it out. It's got to be something that, there can't be technical glitches. It's got to be something they read the question like, yep, I know the answer to that. And so we essentially came up with this. We essentially came up with this survey that, I'm paraphrasing here, but there's basically a disclaimer at the top that said it fit on an index card. Like the officers would literally give an index card to everybody they had contact with. And it literally said, hey, taking the survey will affect your case in no way. It'll be anonymous. And then it had a question that basically said, considering the service that you were given today, how comfortable are you with Carthage PD serving your family in the future? Because as Jack and I discussed it, well, like that's the key, right? Like if you thought we gave you good service, you're going to be comfortable with us serving your family. If you thought we mistreated you or did not give you good service, you're not going to be comfortable with us serving your family. So that was it. So they literally could go on any electronic device they wanted. We actually, I don't think we probably wouldn't do it exactly the same way, but we actually hired a company to do it, to manage that for us. And so you could go to literally any device. You could take it in English or Spanish. We have a considerable Hispanic population here in Carthage. So you could, and literally it was, here's the question, how comfortable are you? And you'd click your answer. And then there was a place for comments, which I really didn't think many people would comment, but a lot of people did. From the officer point of view, what I really wanted to do was I did not want them to think, okay, I'm going to hand out this survey and someone's going to give me a bad mark, basically, and I'm going to be punished. I really wanted the surveys getting out there because I really wanted to know how people felt about our community. And so we told our officers, everybody, if they're a crime victim, if they're a witness, if they got arrested, you know, if you had to tase them and cuff them and drag them to jail, they get a survey. You know, like any official police contact, they get a survey. Don't be scared to give out surveys. And basically, as this first slide talks about, you know, it's going to be a coaching issue, right? If you get great surveys, we are going to actually praise you and you know, and come to you and go, man, your surveys are doing great. These are your strengths. If you get some rough surveys, it's going to be coaching. But generally, this is not going to be disciplinary action. We want to know how our community feels. The only way that we're going to know is if you give these out. And so the officers were basically encouraged that they would give them out, that they would be, you know, treated fairly. Now we're going to talk about this in a minute. It didn't happen, but I was very worried that, well, what if we uncover something extremely scandalous that we can't ignore, and we would have taken care of it. But generally, you know, it was a coaching thing, right? And so what you're looking at on this slide is from our survey results. We did it for about a year, and it was working so well, we did it for another year, and we were going to do it again, some form of it here in 2020. But since just by the fact we're having this conference virtually, you know, 2020 didn't work out for a lot of things. So it didn't work out for the surveys either. So, you know, we really, you know, we haven't, in 2020, we did not reinitiate them, but that is on the agenda for the future. But so the Likert scale was, you know, it went from extremely comfortable to extremely uncomfortable, and they could mark whichever one they wanted. Well, you can see that over the 2 years, 95% of our population that got this survey and filled it out were in the comfortable range. So they were all the way from comfortable to extremely comfortable. And actually somewhere in the 80s, 82, 83% were extremely comfortable, but 95% were comfortable and above. And so, first of all, so we got validation, right? We're like, okay, not only do I know that we've changed the culture of this department, I know our community is being taken care of better, but now I can go to, you know, if someone comes in and says, hey, you know, your police officers are mistreating a certain population, segment population or whatever, then I can say, okay, well, let's talk specifics. Well, I don't have specifics. I just think they're being mistreated. Well, hey, let me show you how our surveys turned out, right? It was something that I could take to my governmental body. It was something I could take to our officers and say, look, this is successful, right? What you guys are doing is great, right? We have all this support from the community. But then, of course, you know, 5% was, you know, some stuff that we did that we wanted to hear, but you don't want to hear. You know what I'm talking about, right? Stuff that you wanted to hear so you could fix it, but you really didn't want to hear it. Like that was 5%, right? And so 5% was, wow, we got to fix this, right? And so one of the things we did, we have body cameras here. So if we got a extremely uncomfortable survey, Jack would get an email notified. He would get notified immediately, and we'd start addressing it immediately. We have body cameras here, so we'd pull the body cam in that event, and we'd see, does the survey match what is being told? And so I got to tell you guys this story real quick because, again, just a great learning experience this whole thing was. But we had the survey. It was terrible. I mean, it was filled out. It had extremely uncomfortable. It had a comment on it that I thought, if this is true, this is the one, right? This person's getting fired. I mean, this is terrible. You know, Jack emails me immediately. Hey, I got this alert. This doesn't look very good. We're talking about it. We pull the body cam. It was a car stop. This car stop was, I mean, you could use it for training. The officer was friendly. He was courteous. He was joking with the driver. You know, they were smiling, laughing back and forth. He tells the driver, hey, I'm here for your safety, right? I've only stopped because I'm worried about your safety. He issues a ticket. He gets a thank you for issuing the ticket. I mean, it is a classic, perfect car stop, just the way I would want my officers to conduct a car stop. Well, he gets the survey. The guy next to him, who is not a fan of the Carthage Police Department and feels like he has been mistreated by us in the past, goes, hey, are you going to fill that out? No, I'll fill it out, right? So he fills it out, puts all these terrible things on there, right? So it ended up, the survey came in terrible, and we ended up actually writing that officer a good job letter for how good he is in doing those car stops. And we've actually employed him in training other officers how to do car stops because it was so good. So, you know, I mean, sometimes it's unexpected, but I would read these things and you'd be like, okay, that did not happen. There is no way this happened, right? And one of the examples is somebody had some money stolen and it was recovered, and they're writing this big, long, I mean, they fill the comment screen with how they couldn't get their money back, how the police department was messing with them, and they couldn't get their money back, and it was horrible and terrible. And I'm thinking, there's no way this happened, right? I go back to our evidence officer, and she's like, yeah, this has been a mess. You know, we've got this policy and that policy, and we have to do it this way and that way. She's like, I haven't been able to get their money back. I want to. And so it's like, okay, we're going to fix this, right? There were, you know, in that 5%, you can see here, training, coaching, mentoring. There were some employees that definitely needed some coaching, and we didn't know it, right? We didn't know it till the surveys come out. There were some officers that were actually going out there, you know, again, a great unexpected finding. There's some officers that were going out there and doing a fabulous job, but they were just quietly doing it, and we didn't really know how great a job they were doing. And their surveys were coming back, and we're like, wow, this officer, you know, is really knocking it out of the park, and we had no idea. So what Jack has put up now is, this is just, we would get, you know, so basically we would track these by call card number. So the officer would give them a card, and it would have the call card number on it. And so it would kind of fit in this matrix. And so basically, if they were good surveys, or even if they were okay surveys, we would just accept them as true. But again, the ones that looked like we needed some coaching are the only ones we would really go look up. But this is kind of like, you know, an average day. Like you can see you can read those. I'm not going to read them to you, but you can see some of the comments. The ones that don't have comments, they just they got their survey, they marked where on the Likert scale they wanted it to go, and they didn't leave a comment, which you did not have to do. And so again, really 95% of our comments were like this. They were, you know, they were comfortable or above. Nobody really needed any coaching. Maybe we just, again, if we found an officer that was getting high survey marks consistently, we would go to that officer and compliment them on specifically what they were doing right. All right, Jack, if you want to go to the next one, that'd be great. Okay, yeah, we just talked about that. We had to redo our property release policy. You know, there's a lot of things that we discovered that we were doing wrong, that we would have, you know, never had any idea we were, especially you at my level, at the command level. I don't ever go get property out of the property, you know, out of our evidence and try to get it released. You know, so these were things that we discovered that were actually very helpful. All right, yeah, there you go. So here's some of the actual negative comments that we got, right? Somebody was extremely uncomfortable because they were not certain why a child riding at night without a bicycle light would be stopped. What was interesting about that is when we looked at the body cam, anybody who's in this seminar in law enforcement is going to laugh. You'll probably figure out what already happened. It was actually an adult on a child's bike at night that was being stopped in a high crime area. But, you know, again, we looked into that. You know, I received mistreatment from an officer detaining me. Immediately, we would pull that body cam and we would look and see if that officer needed some coaching. You know, and again, we were ready, which I don't want to go there next. It's on the next slide. But, you know, we were ready, you know, hey, if there's something, right, we knew that we could not ignore, like for example, you know, if we found out one of our officers was taking bribes or something like that, like we knew we couldn't ignore it, and we were ready to deal with a big problem. Oh yeah, there it is, Jack. Thank you. You know, and these are actually some hypotheticals from a different department. But you know, we knew we might have to demote somebody. We might have to suspend somebody. We might have to take disciplinary action because, right, there's some things you just can't ignore, right? You know, you can't coach. You know, it's kind of like I joked with Jack earlier when we were prepping for this. You don't go to the officer and be like, okay, great car stop, don't take bribes next time. You know, like you can't coach somebody like that, right? So we were ready to find out something big like that. We actually did not during our time of our survey, but we knew everyone was getting a survey. One of the interesting things that came out is we actually had officers who would, the more dramatic the arrest, like the more that happened, they really wanted to make sure that that person got a survey, because it almost became kind of like a competition. It's like, well, that guy was really drunk, crashed into some people, we tased him, we took him to jail, and then on the survey, he still said he got treated well, right? So it kind of became a little competition between the officers. It's like, no, I think I'm still going to get a good survey here, right? Even though this was a dramatic arrest or whatever, I think I'm going to get a good survey. So they would do that. But yeah, so we did that. That's about right what Jack had on the slide before. We did several, lots of hours of coaching, mentoring, rewarding, there you go. Mentoring relationships, coaching, rewarding, reaching out to other members of our community. If we would find out that we were, hey, not really good at this, well, let's get good at it. Let's find somebody that's good at it. Let's reach out to them. So we did a lot of that, and it was a good deal. Now, again, I know we're short time, and I'm kind of talking kind of fast here, but I just want to tell you, if you're sitting in the room right now thinking, this guy lost his mind, him and Jack, they're insane, they've lost their mind, do you really want to do that? Do you really want to give a survey to everyone? Because there are certain people that don't like you. You're the police. There are certain people that they aren't going to like the way they were treated, because even if they were treated great, they still got arrested. I was literally told by my peers that I had lost my mind, that I was insane, that there's just some things you don't want to know, Chief. There's just some things you don't want to know. And one of the things that I said is, not only do we want to know, but I'm going to tell everybody, right? I mean, the deal we cut with Arbinger is these were going to be published results. And by the way, you can go on the web and look at it. Arbinger actually did a study about this, and you can, read about it and see some of the videos and stuff. But yeah, it was, I'm not only going to know, but I'm going to tell everybody, because now you have to remember, this was in 2018, I think is when we did our last surveys. More now than ever, the public is demanding transparency. They want us to be transparent. They want us to identify our problems and fix our problems and talk about doing it. And this is one of the ways, right? And what I would say to those people that told me that I was crazy, so I'm like, well, so I can have a problem in my department and let it fester and let it continue until it's a big community scandal, and suddenly we're on YouTube and not for the right reason. Or I can find out what these problems are and coach these officers up front. And you know what? I'm very proud of our results. I think that was great. But if they hadn't been that good, it would have been fine with me, right? Because I did want to know, right? I did want to know who we needed to coach, who we needed to mentor, who we needed to train. If there was somebody that didn't need to be here, I wanted to know about that. And so actually I was told I was crazy a lot. But when we were done, man, these results were so valuable to us. They were truly invaluable. And of course, enough that we're going to do this again in some form. Okay, I think I'm ready to go on. Oh, okay. That's all right. Awesome. Okay. So, couldn't remember if there was more or not, Jack. So, and by the way, I've been told if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat and we can answer it. But so going back and applying this to the SAM model, and then I think I'm going to turn it back over to Jack and see if he has I'll give him some warning, see if he has anything to say on this. So applying this to the SAM model, right? So, okay. First of all, we have to see our community, right? And so, truly see our community. What do they need? What do they want? What are their expectations of us? Which, by the way, just because they want it doesn't mean we should do it, but maybe we should, right? Do they need it? Is it a reasonable expectation? And so, looking at that, and then we put in all this effort to change our culture. But then it's like, okay, how do I measure impact and adjust if I don't know what worked? And as I always told Jack, I'm like, well, I can go to the Chamber of Commerce president who's going to tell me we're doing great. You know, I can go to our city council who's going to tell me we're doing great. I can go to, you know, whatever industry leader and he's going to tell me we're doing great. That doesn't mean we're doing great. Right? Doesn't mean that, because that means, you know, there's so many people in our community, the largest segment of our community, we have no idea what they think. So how can I measure their impact first? And then how can I adjust efforts to do things better unless I know the impact? And so, you know, this is really where this came from. It's a lot easier, you know, as this diagram Jack has up, it's a little easier to do it with your boss, right? It's a little easier to do it maybe with the people that work under you, but we're talking about a whole community. Like, how do you understand the needs of the community and see that your efforts made a positive difference? And so again, you know, that was kind of the craziness for the survey. I will, before I turn it back over to Jack, I will say that I have shared this survey with many, many people. It's not a secret. We want it to catch on, right? Like, if you're sitting there thinking, man, I wish my department was, you know, was more transparent. I wish we could come up with a way, you know, so yeah, I mean, so we got a question, which I'll answer here in a minute, but I want to share it. Just get with me. My email, I think, is on the last slide, and I'd love to share it. So one of the questions is, which is a great question, when implementing the survey and passing out the cards, how was it received by your officers? How long did it take them to realize the benefit to the community? So I'll tell you a story about that. So I had an all-department meeting. And so we're not a big department, town of about 20,000 people, so I have about 50 employees. We had an all-department meeting. And when I said, hey, we're going to do this, it's going to be great, one of our officers in the front row, she just looks at me and goes, why? And I said, well, here's why. And she goes, Chief, I still don't understand why, right? And so it took a little bit. And then, you know, I mean, cops, I'm a cop, so I can say this, you know, cops are like, I don't know if I trust that. Let's let some people hand out a few surveys and see what happens, right? And so it took a little bit, right? I mean, I'd say it took us a couple weeks they would hand out surveys, and some of them would come back great and some not so great, and nobody got fired and nobody got written up. But, you know, I would send out to my officers, hey, thanks, Officer Smith, for the good job you did. Here's your surveys in the comments. And I would send that to everybody, and they'd be like, oh, this is kind of cool, right? And then if you had a bad survey, you got some coaching, or we, like, you know, like if you, like the story I told, if you couldn't do a car stop, if you weren't very good at it, we'd hook you up with our car stop expert that we learned that we had no idea that this guy was great at car stops, right? So it took a little bit. And I'm going to tell you, just being honest, of the, you know, whatever it was, 45 employees that were actually handing out surveys, I'm sure there was a couple that still were never on board, right? But the vast majority of our department got on board and embraced it. And like I said, it was almost a challenge. Okay, this guy knows going to give me a bad survey. Let's see what happens, right? And so, you know, and then that survey would come back, you know, okay or exceptional. So, but yeah, it took a lot of selling. All right, Jack's got his hand up, and I'm going to give it back to him.
Yeah, this question, I want to make another comment, because one of the reasons I think this process is more relevant today than it ever has been is exactly what's been going on for the last several months in law enforcement. One of the things that law enforcement is contending with is what you might call grouping narratives. Like, things will be said in the media by political leaders. I saw U.S. Congress people saying this type of thing. The police murdered George Floyd. Well, so that's grouping all police to be murderers of George Floyd, and then grouping further, like every time force is used against a person of color, it's like and kind to the situation with George Floyd. And then you have people that say, and because I speak for everybody, if you contend with the validity of my statements, then that's just more of the same problem. In fact, Chief had someone come in and address him in that way with kind of these boilerplate accusations against his department, relevant to like 30% of his population. the benefit here is that when you look at this, what Chief had when this came up is, well, actually, I want to know everything you have to tell me about this concern, because the people who have actually received police service from us, this is what they've said. 95% of them have been saying things like this, and this is all open record. You know, this has all been posted on the web, so it's not like it's a secret. You know, we're open with this in the media. We're open this with our city leaders. So any details you have about your concerns about the way my organization operates, I would love to hear it, because I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Now, the thing that police leaders and even civic leaders have now is there essentially is no way of answering those types of accusations if the fact that you just simply say, well, I don't have any record of that, I can't tell that it's true, and is meant as, well, that's just more of the problem. Now you actually have an answer. And again, the idea of drilling down here is we're not just capturing it and putting out the good stuff. We're actually capturing it and saying, hey, we found out some things that we have to update. It uncovered some systemic problems, and this is how we addressed it. We've actually got a new policy around this that we've published. We've actually taken disciplinary action around this material. And you know, these officers that are identified that are getting you know, highly comfortable remarks all the time, they're kind of our new leaders, mentors, and heroes. One of the things that I've worked with, and I've been working in law enforcement, you know, since like '82. And one of the things I've noticed in a lot of agencies is that the heroes of the organization, the culture, are not necessarily the kind of people you want out there building trust. In fact, they're actually demolishing trust, but they're kind of those people that make things happen aggressively and fastly. So people kind of like having them around, but they kind of tend to create problems, and they tend to be kind of the heroes, like they're the tough cops, you know, from my day. Well, this process would actually change who the admired cops are. And as the chief pointed out, now the admired cops are the ones that can have challenging situations and still and handle it professionally and safely, and still get good comments from people. It's not unusual. It's not difficult. There's officers around the country doing it all. In fact, I would say this 95% ratio is probably pretty common. I think probably 95% or more of police contacts are favorable. You wouldn't know that by watching what's being said in the media. And this is a way of answering it. This is a way of guaranteeing and demonstrating that our officers are people-centric and are responding to the challenges and the concerns of the people that they deliver police service from us. And we have a way of actually demonstrating it. You want to tell that story that you told me about the concerned activist person, Chief?
Hey, Jack, can I ask a couple questions? First of all, do you mind stopping sharing and let us see you guys as you talk here for a minute? Yep. Chief, you mentioned that when something went wrong that you knew immediately. What do you mean by immediately? I mean, was it
when I said that I knew that it didn't happen?
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, when you got a bad report, what is kind of the lag time between you getting the report coming in and you knowing about it?
So again, we had it set up so the minute they fill that thing out, because again, they could submit it on their iPad, their phone, their computer, however they wanted to do it, any electronic device. The minute they click that box and hit submit, if it said extremely uncomfortable, Jack got an email, and he would email me immediately. So we literally knew.
Middle of the night, no matter what, it was coming to you.
Yeah, we knew. And I remember a few nights I'm sitting at home thinking, well, it's 9 o'clock at night. Do I really want to, go in and look at body cam? But, so sometimes we did and sometimes we didn't, but we knew immediately.
Okay. And part of it, you go through the SAM model, and obviously you meant, the first part of the SAM model, you talked about seeing what your citizens as a whole see as far as the surveys go. but you also mentioned that your officers all went through some training that of the same kind of training. And what do you teach? What does that kind of process teach your officers to look for instance, on a traffic stop? Or I mean, you're obviously, I mean, I know, in fact, you are teaching them how to handle situations and how to kind of gauge the room, so to speak. How does that work?
Yeah, so the outward mindset training is, again, it's an Arbinger thing, and there's actually an outward mindset for police officers, and that is what we teach them within the first year. And it's one thing to say, and by the way, I hope I don't offend anybody here, but so much of the police training that we're required to take, being racially sensitive and things like that. Hey, that's great that we do that, but most of the training isn't great. Most of the training is, well, people are important. You should see them as people, right? You should treat everybody the same. And it's like, okay, well, I got that, but what's that really look like, right?
Yeah, how do I do that? Okay.
Yeah. I'm a guy on the street, and I've dealt with this same guy 19 times in the last month. How do I do that? How do I see him as a person? So this training really, it really hones in on interpersonal skills of the police officer, really how they see themselves, because most people don't see themselves accurately, and seeing other people, being curious about their needs, wants, and desires, seeing other people as people, which, by the way, when I know Jack does the same, when we both teach it, we actually throw in there that, by the way, you're a lot safer when you do that, right? If you're the police officer driving going, well, I've dealt with this guy 19 times, going to be the same crap again, you're not nearly as safe as when you're driving there going, I wonder what's going on today. I wonder if I'm going to be able to help him. I wonder if I'm going to, I wonder what his needs are, if I'm going to be able to meet him. And, one of the things we always stress to our officers is, this is not the, hug people, be nice to people class. We're not saying that you should go out and be officer friendly to everybody, but we're saying, if you take some enforcement action, it should be because that is really necessary. It should be something your community needs you to do, not because you're doing it because you're mad, upset, whatever, but it should be something your community needs you to do, or that person may even need you to do. And so it really teaches how to it gives you some tools to use so that you can see that.
Okay, thanks.
John, I would make a comment about that is I wouldn't necessarily recommend instituting this survey without the underpinning of like what Chief had there is like the outward mindset implemented among the organization so that they had a sense of, oh, I know what this is. This is the SAM model, and we're actually measuring impact, and they have something to connect it with rather than one more way for me to, get in trouble.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's only fair to your officers to be able to get the training how to handle it. And I guess and I think, Chief, you mentioned that you're revisiting that on an as-needed basis. If somebody has a couple of rough traffic stops, you sit down and go over the fundamentals with them again. And so it's an ongoing kind of training, one-on-one, as well as kind of the classroom setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coaching's ongoing. It's not a one-time event. So
we kind of have this kind of inside concern that what is put out as early warning systems is actually late warning systems. The whole thing of left of bang is pre-event, like what you're doing pre-event, right of bang. Well, all early warning systems are right of bang because they're picking up on things that have already happened. The difference would be is like if I work for the chief and like you had this set up at a supervisor level, let's say in a large organization, is if one of my officers got a very uncomfortable, like 2 o'clock in the morning, the chief could call and say, hey, let's meet down here at Independence and Winter. You just got this response come back. I just want to check in, just make sure you're doing okay. For all I know, maybe, his wife bolted out with the kids right before he came to work or something, and he's really in a bad way and something else needs to happen for the night. But you can know about it. You can know about these things left of bang if you're getting, like I sometimes call it relational telemetry. You're actually getting feedback as to the status of how this person is in relationship to people, so we don't have to wait for the catastrophe. I see this as being sponsored by a risk management agency. We don't have to wait for the catastrophe to happen to take some kind of response to the catastrophe. We can actually have our red flags popping up, little bitty ones here, as opposed to the big massive ones that are hitting national media here.
Okay. Chief, there's another question in the chat room. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that. So the question is, what percentage of surveys were actually returned? So I got to tell you, I was disappointed with this. We got less than 10% back. And I was like, are we not giving them out? Are we not? Well, in talking with survey experts, including a survey company, they're like, so all you're doing is hand them out and say, take this if you want. I'm like, basically, yeah. And they're like, 10% is an excellent return rate. You're doing good. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, 10% is pretty good. So I just had to accept the fact that was going to be our return rate.
Okay.
No free Slurpee, and they're still taking it at a 10% rate. They were quite impressed with that. One of the things that Chief didn't mention is he did press releases and press conferences and interviews for all the local media to explain it so that people would have a sense of anticipation around it. I suspect that now if you had a community that was inflamed and concerned about police service, and let's say calling for defunding and all that, if this was put up as an alternative like transparency, there may be a larger percentage of participation in the surveys, which would be a good thing. It was protected, authenticated by a computer-aided dispatch number, so you couldn't just have people going on and loading up negative surveys because they hate the police. It was all relevant to an event, so it was actionable, and you could actually adjust efforts in a meaningful way around it.
Yeah, it's okay, John. I'd like to address that a little bit. So, yeah, thank you, Jack. I wanted to go there. So we did some media release stuff. And again, just so if you got the survey, you know what was going on. We had a lot of people calling, wanting to take the survey, or I don't know a lot, but several were like, no, you have to have contact with us, right? You have to have contact to take the survey. That's the point. Not just anybody can take it. But, man, a couple things happened there that were amazing. I literally, everywhere I'd go, people would be like, that's so neat that you're doing that survey. That's so awesome that you want to know what your community thinks. It's so, it's so amazing that you're going to release those results. So we literally got big credit points from our community just for asking the community what they thought, which was something I did not expect. The other thing is, like our city leaders were like, okay, so we really thought you guys were doing a good job, but amazing, right? Wow, incredible that that the numbers were what they were. So it gave us a lot of validation there. And I'll tell the story Jack wanted me to really quickly, because if you work in the police world, well, if you work in government, it's an everyday thing. I had this person come in and say, hey, I have some friends of a certain cultural group, and they're scared of your police officers, and your police officers are picking on them. And I said, well, I don't put up with that. Tell me who, when, and where, and we'll fix it. Well, they're scared. They don't want me to tell who they are. They're scared. I said, okay, well, give me a circumstance in which, if they want to remain anonymous or whatever, give me a circumstance. So, well, I don't have one of those. They're just generally scared. So I said, okay, I'll meet with one of them anonymously. I said, you want me to fix this, you got to give me something. Well, they don't want to do that. Chief, I just want you guys to take racial profiling training. And I'm like, yeah, it's already state mandated. We already do that. Well, you need to do something else. Okay, well, we already do this outward mindset training. And here's what it does. So I said, look, I'm not arguing with you. I want to solve the problem, but you got to give me some data. So I'm like, oh, by the way, here's our surveys that came in. And here's what our community thought of us, around this event. So I said, I've got data. You're telling me you can't give me information. If you want me to solve this, you got to help me. And the guy basically left. I'm like, hey, we've got some community boards, groups you can be on. Had no interest, left. And so again, I wasn't trying to run him off, but I thought to myself, what if I didn't have that data, right? So anyway. I think in the Q&A, there's some stuff showing up.
Yeah, there's a couple. Bev's asking a question about something that I brought up, and I'm going to respond to it. So the question was mentioned about the good old boy club, or the mentality of past officers and leadership poses a potential constraint to a department. Could you explain a little more about this concept? So if someone wants to email me afterward, I can actually send you a video that explains it. So my co-author on the book I wrote was an example of this. He was very, very type A. We have a video of coworkers saying, you know, type A, alpha male, he's a jerk, I didn't want anything to do with him. No self-awareness, like he's the kind of guy you call to get, you know what, done. And because he got things done, he was accepted as kind of, you know, the kind of guy that could get things done. He was actually brought in to fix a high-risk entry team as a, you know, as a SWAT. It's a highest risk entry and tactical oversight of undercovers team. And that's when we got together around this material, and he changed himself as a leader, which changed that high-risk entry team. And they went from the most complained 6 people on the department to 0 complaints over a period of 10 years. So I can send you a link to the story, but all that to say is, you know, Chip wasn't ostracized because he had this, you know, I'm the alpha, I'll get things done, call me when you need something done. And I could use terminology that would, you know, kick butt, take names, kind of that kind of a mentality. He wasn't ostracized because he was that way. He was actually kept in a lot of people's back pocket because that's the kind of person that they wanted, even though the past supervisor had been fired from the 1910 squad for a use of force event. Typically, departments have liked and valued having someone, or, you know, people around that make stuff happen, like, you know, clear this area and do all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. There's, I don't know that, you know, maybe good old boy club isn't a good analogy, maybe not, I don't know. But it's just more this mentality of the kind of officers that you want around. Like if you got an obnoxious person at a tavern disturbance, man, I wish Bob was here because Bob would put this guy in his place, you know, that kind of a thing. So that's that. And self-awareness around having some responsibility for around that and changing what we honor as being relevant would drastically change the culture of the organization, which is what Chief has experienced. Now, she also asked how to help officers when they're afraid to speak up about their leadership. Well, that's one of the beauties about this, because look, here's how it would work. If let's say I'm a supervisor and John and Greg and Cameron report to me, and I'm seeing these 3 people here, so that's why I'm using them. And so let's change it. Let's say Greg's the supervisor and John and I and Cameron report to him. And Greg has something, and he says to me like, hey, those community feedback surveys, there's some struggling. Yeah, well, you know, these people are a bunch of jerks and a-holes, like all the typical justifications. You can't do anything with these people. Like, and I give you a couple of examples of extreme examples of what idiots and how unreasonable they are. And that's always true. That's always out there, right? And then the chief, for the first time with these surveys, is able to say, well, yeah, you know, Jack, this is a challenging sector that we work in. You know, the overnights, there's, you know, a lot of crime. But however, Cameron, who works right alongside you in the same sector, same watch, his surveys are coming back fine. And he's agreed to mentor you. And we're going to get you some extra coaching and training from the Arbinger people we have in-house, because these surveys, these responses have to improve. We can't, you're going to improve, and we're going to do everything we can to help you improve. And so now, for the first time, we actually have some accountability around this. What has historically got police departments in so much trouble is that just a lack of accountability, not just at the officer contact level, but at a supervisor level. The reason so what Greg is going to say is, look, these will improve because I'm the sergeant and I got to answer to the captain for these scores. So Cameron doesn't have to speak to Greg's weaknesses. The process will speak to Greg's weaknesses and expose them. It will invite personal responsibility and accountability for results, but it will expose those at every level of leadership that aren't taking them, especially when it's being published on the World Wide Web at the level of the division commander. So that would be my answer to that as well, Bev. I don't know how we're doing on time, or if you have a thought about that on Greg. You're muted, John.
I says we still have 10 or 15 minutes to answer any questions. And so what you're saying is that being accountable and being transparent in itself in this kind of system is going to, it'll know that there's a bottleneck in the system. In other words, if one shift or one department isn't getting led correctly, there's no leadership there, that will show up with the people below them because it just isn't working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I would add is, when along those lines of Bev's question, when when people told me that I was crazy and I shouldn't do this, there were definitely varying reasons that they gave. But what kept resonating with me is, well, they would say, well, I don't want to know. Well, why don't you want to know? And here's what it would boil down to is, if I know, I have to take care of it, right? If I don't know, I don't have to take care of it. And that goes back to what Bev said about, the good old boys. It's like, well, if I don't know something's wrong, I don't have to take care of it. But if it's written down and the surveys, everybody's seeing them in the command, then I'm going to have to take care of it. And again, that's the benefit of these surveys, is it will open things up, whether you want it to or not. It will open things up.
Well, not to mention the fact that it's going to be on the World Wide Web, and the media is going to be able to look at that anytime they want. Look, imagine the response being, hey, we have a use of force event that looks pretty sketchy. What's going on with these surveys? Well, it turns out, 95% of the people are saying they're doing a great job, and this is what they're doing to address the concerns. It completely changes the complexion of the discussion at that point, as opposed to a bunch of sharing of negative, like it's an availability bias, I think is what the technical terminology is if all that's being shared is negative experiences over and over again, the availability bias, then when you see a challenging use of force event, and by the way, those are not going away. We're not going to make those go away, because it's the kind of work that's going to have, it's not going to look good sometimes. And when they happen and they're going to be videotaped, now all of a sudden there's a whole different perspective around how to interpret that in light of like this body of knowledge that's being transparently displayed, as opposed to just a kind of this availability heuristic of negativity that everyone's kind of reacting. It's kind of like everyone's super agitated, and so everything's just blowing it up every time. This would be a way of bringing a calming sense to the presence that police departments have within their community, and even within the police department, like we can take control of this and we can do something with it. Well,
we're constantly being asked, right? Well, what are you doing to improve your relationship with your community? I mean, that's the thing now, right? If you're a police department, you better be working on your relationship with your community. What are you doing? How are you doing that? Well, you can guess. You can come up with some ideas, and that's what Jack and I were talking about the other day, is you can Google and you can come up with some community programs, and you can guess and you can try, or you can do a survey and you can actually know. I mean, it was great, because during that time, I was able to tell my bosses, my elected officials, oh, by the way, during this 2 years, here's the list of things that we did to improve our relationship with the community. And we were able to articulate why we did those, how we did those, and, when the project was done, again, all due to these surveys.
And just one example of what Craig's talking about, he didn't bring this up, but, this person had a concern about their mistreatment of the Hispanic community. It turns out when the health department needed help reaching in the Hispanic community with how to respond correctly to the COVID virus, they couldn't get responses. And the health department, as I recall the story, actually used your connections within the police department to get educational and help material to the Hispanic community. Completely contrary, in keeping with your surveys, your Spanish-speaking surveys, but completely contrary to the, say, boilerplate accusations that were leveled against your organization. That's what we're talking about, is the ability to actually have a response that isn't arguing, just saying, well, I don't know, but here's what people that receive police service from us are saying.
Okay, great. Jack, if I can ask one question of you, I mean, we're really kind of talking about two things here. Number one, we're talking about the Arbinger SAM model, and then we're talking about a particular department that has taken that and ran with it in their way, right? And I think they've done a wonderful job. And you teach all over the country, or you have people that teach all over the country. What are some of the other kind of programs that, other than just training, that you're seeing some police departments get into that build trust within their cities?
Well, so we've recently, and I just put a link into a Answering the Call of 2020. It's a no-cost public safety summit that we're putting out the last day of this month. And so you can click on that. You can find more about it. You can register if it works for you. One of the things we did with that is we captured stories from around the country in various venues. Like one venue was officer safety and awareness and decision-making, like we talked about, experts in that field. Officer wellness, resiliency, and suicide prevention. We had experts from around the country in that. But the other one was, specifically what we were looking at is, let's take the issue of homelessness as an example. What you see around the country is the responses that organizations, communities that are well-meaning, frequently the responses that they have to be helpful around the issue of homelessness actually tend to make things worse, like spin the cycle more. And then they kind of have these areas that are like unsafe, disease-ridden, insanitary, and all that. Like it actually grows the problem. Well, so what we were looking at is, what are some models that are actually empowering and equipping other people to make meaningful contribution back into the community? And so we went around and captured stories and situations like that. The interesting thing is that obviously, when you're like, for example, the West Side Community Action Network here, so there's officers that are working there in a collaborative way to help, let's say in this case, a group of migrant workers turn and make meaningful contributions where they had been kind of an eyesore and a problem for the whole community, because they're like frequently semi-homeless migrant workers. Well, one of the officers there is also on the board of a charter school in the area. And so one of the things that, like one day I was talking to Chato last week, and he was just getting back from taking this group out to do graffiti abatement in the neighborhood, where they're at an elderly woman's house tearing down weeds because her house is being obscured and it's unsafe for, like, say, a burglary point of view. You can't see her house. Or they're packing backpacks for it's a low-income neighborhood at this charter school, so they're packing back to school backpacks personalized for the students, and the migrant workers are participating in that process. Like, so they're making meaningful contribution back into their community, where before they were considered to be a scourge. Now there's actually times where they're celebrated and honored for their contributions to the community. So those are the kind of things that departments can do that actually build trust in a meaningful way, but also help by enabling others to make meaningful contribution. In other words, using their capacities as officers to bring in extra resources to equip and enable others that are like, where normally they would be considered a drain on the system, to actually be a contribution system. Now that kind of thing really builds community trust. But all that being said, donuts with a cop, coffee with a cop, all that kind of stuff, the truth is you can do a lot of those and they're not going to compensate for, say, in this an organization the size of Kansas City, you have thousands of community contacts a day. Well, having coffee with a cop 30 times every 2 weeks is a mammoth undertaking, but it isn't going to affect the thousands of contacts you have every day. If those aren't going well, it doesn't matter that 30 coffee with the cops went well. So the focus needs to be on the big picture. What's actually the impact when we're delivering police service? Because that's where this body of information is relevant. And that's what we need to answer the challenges that are being put towards police departments in 2020. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, thank you. You have a couple minutes each, I think, to kind of wrap up, and thanks for your time today.
Well, I'll just say thank you for your attention very much. You got my email address. I put it in the chat. I also put the link to the webcast. It's no charge, and it'll give you a good understanding of what Arbinger is proposing as a path forward, and I would say a very positive and helpful path forward. And you got my email address. So my role with Arbinger is to be engaged with civic and police and public safety leaders in a helpful way. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. Now, the chief, on the other hand, he actually has another job. So I'm sure he's filled out a lot of questions, and he's obviously a much more expert relevant to actually doing it than I am. And I'm sure he's happy to be contacted as well. So, Chief.
Yeah, and thanks. And I would always say, I always end with this challenge. I mean, guys, look. I mean, everybody that can hear me or see me right now, look at where we're at, right? We've got to improve these relationships with our community. We've got to change how we do things. And maybe this survey thing is not for you. Maybe there's something else you want to do, but we've got to be proactive in building these relationships. That's my final challenge to you. We've got to be proactive in building relationships. If you have a responsive police department that's not being proactive, as Jack pointed out, when you have one of these very high profile use of force incidents and you don't have that relationship with your community, it's probably not going to go well for you. So whatever it is, if it's a survey, if it's something else, if you've got a great idea you want to share with me and I'll implement it, that's great. But we definitely have to be proactive. We have to be seeking what our community desires. And if at all possible, we have to be responsive to them. We do serve them. We are public servants, which goes without saying.
Well, thank you. On behalf of our presenters today and the League of Cities and Towns, we thank you for your participation in this workshop. Chief Dagnan and Jack Caldwell, thank you so much for taking the time. And both of these, we're going to have a roundtable discussion with these two gentlemen and a few of our police chiefs here in the state. And it starts in about 45 minutes. So please tune in then, and it's good to see you. Thank you.